The rollout meeting for Phase 7 was scheduled to start in 4 minutes. 15 department heads filled the leather chairs, their voices creating a low hum of anticipation. Callahan looked up, noticed me, and his expression shifted. That particular tightening around the eyes that people develop when they're about to deliver bad news they think is good news. "Sammy, can I see you in the hall?" The room went quiet for half a second. Just long enough for everyone to register the redirect. I nodded, set my laptop on the credenza, and followed him out. The hallway was all glass and steel, the kind of architecture that made every conversation feel like it was happening on a stage. Callahan closed the door behind us with exaggerated care, the soft click somehow louder than a slam would have been. "Look," he started, hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. "You complicate things too much." I watched him. Waited. The Phase 7 rollout is high visibility. Investors, board members, the works. We need clean messaging. Simple execution. Your approach, he gestured vaguely, as if my approach were a physical object between us that he couldn't quite name. It's just got too many moving parts. Too many contingencies. People get confused. Understood, I said. He blinked. I think he'd expected pushback. Prepared for it, even. The quick surrender seemed to throw him. Great. That's great. I knew you'd understand. We'll catch you up afterward, obviously. This is just about optics. I nodded again, turned, and walked back toward my office. Behind me, I heard the conference room door open, heard Callahan's voice shift into that performative brightness people use when they want to signal that everything is going exactly according to plan. I've been with Twilight Technologies for 11 years. Started as a systems analyst when the company was 6 people in a converted warehouse, back when Callahan was still VP of operations at his previous firm. The founder, Old Man Whitmore, hired me because I'd caught a cascade failure risk in their infrastructure design that nobody else had flagged. He gave me equity instead of a competitive salary. Said I'd earned a seat at the table. 3 years ago, Whitmore retired and handed me 42% of the company in a private transfer. Kept it quiet. No press release, no board announcement. Just paperwork filed with lawyers and a handshake in his study. He wanted to make sure the work he'd built would stay in the hands of someone who understood what it actually did, not just what it looked like it did. Callahan had joined as director 2 years prior. Came from a competitor, brought a Rolodex and a lot of ideas about modernization. The board loved him. He had the presence they wanted, the pedigree that opened doors. Whitmore had tolerated him, mostly because Callahan was good at the parts of the job that bored Whitmore. The schmoozing. The deck building. The investor calls. I kept my shares quiet because it suited me. Let me work without the constant performance anxiety that comes with visible authority. Let me focus on the systems, the architecture, the things that actually kept Twilight running. Callahan didn't know. The board knew, but they were old school. They understood the value of a silent partner who kept the engines running while the figureheads managed the spotlight. I went back to my office, a small room on the 3rd floor with a window that looked out over the parking structure. My desk was organized chaos, 3 monitors, stacks of documentation, a mechanical keyboard I'd built myself. I pulled up the Phase 7 implementation plan. Callahan had rewritten it. Not revised. Rewritten. The original plan I designed had 17 checkpoints, each one a failsafe to catch errors before they cascaded. Redundancies built into the database migration. Rollback protocols for each module. A phased deployment that would touch 5% of our client base at a time, with automated monitoring flagging anomalies before they became critical. Callahan's version cut it down to 4 checkpoints. Streamlined, he'd called it in his notes. The deployment would hit 60% of clients in the first wave. Go big or go home, he'd written in a comment thread. The monitoring protocols were simplified to a single dashboard that tracked uptime and nothing else. I sat back in my chair. Stared at the screen. The changes weren't just aggressive. They were architectural vandalism. He'd removed the load balancing protocols I'd built to handle traffic spikes during migration. Eliminated the staged database replication that would have allowed us to verify data integrity at each step. Collapsed 3 separate deployment phases into one massive push. Every simplification created a single point of failure. And he'd created 13 of them. My phone buzzed. A text from Yolanda in infrastructure. 3 words, did you see? I called her. Tell me he didn't, she said instead of hello. He did. Sammy, this is insane. We built those checkpoints for a reason. The database migration alone has 6 dependencies that can fail independently. If we push to 60% of clients without staged verification. I know. So what are we doing? I looked at the implementation timeline. Phase 7 was set to deploy in 72 hours. Sunday morning, 3 a.m., when traffic was lowest. We're documenting, I said. Everything. Every decision point, every change Callahan made, every risk we flagged. Timestamps, version histories, the works. Yolanda was quiet for a moment. Then, you're building a paper trail. I'm being thorough. That's not the same thing as stopping this. No, I agreed. It's not. She hesitated. I could hear the question forming before she asked it. You think it's going to fail? I think Callahan removed every mechanism designed to prevent failure. What happens after that is just physics. And you're going to let it happen. I'm going to document that I advised against it. There's a difference. Is there? I didn't answer that. Instead I said, pull the original infrastructure specs. The ones we submitted 3 months ago. Make sure your copy is timestamped and backed up offsite. Already done. Good. Now go through every email thread about Phase 7. Anything where you raised concerns, flagged risks, questioned the timeline. Export them. PDF format, with full headers showing dates and recipients. You're really doing this. I'm protecting the people who did their jobs correctly. I spent the next 6 hours pulling records. Every email I'd sent outlining risks. Every meeting note where I'd raised concerns. Every technical specification that Callahan had overridden. I compiled it into a single document, cross-referenced and dated. Saved it in 3 separate locations, including a cloud service that Twilight didn't control. Then I pulled the original Phase 7 plan and printed it. All 87 pages. Put it in a binder with tabs marking each checkpoint, each failsafe, each decision tree. The printer jamming on page 43 felt like an omen. I cleared it, reset the paper tray, and watched the remaining pages scroll out with the patience of someone who'd learned that rushing only created more problems. At 7 p.m., my phone rang. Callahan. Hey, Sammy. Just wanted to check in. Make sure there's no hard feelings about this morning. No hard feelings, I said. Good, good. You know how it is. Sometimes we have to make the call that looks best for the stakeholders. They don't want to hear about worst-case scenarios and contingency plans. They want confidence. Momentum. I understand. Excellent. Oh, and I'm going to need you to review the final deployment script before we go live. Just a sanity check. Can you have that back to me by tomorrow afternoon? He wanted my signature on it. My approval in the chain of custody. I'll take a look, I said. Great. And Sammy? I appreciate you being a team player on this. Shows real maturity. I hung up. Stared at my phone for a long moment. Team player. As if objecting to preventable catastrophe was somehow childish. I reviewed the script. It took 3 hours because I annotated every single point where it deviated from safe practice. Logged every removed safeguard. Calculated the probability cascade for each potential failure mode. The math wasn't encouraging. Under optimal conditions, with perfect execution and no unexpected variables, Callahan's script had a 68% chance of completing successfully. But optimal conditions don't exist in production environments. Unexpected variables are the only constant. By the time I factored in realistic tolerances, the success probability dropped to 42%. Coin flip odds on a system managing $200 million in annual client transactions. I sent it back with a 2-page technical memo outlining the specific failure modes that could occur. Kept my tone neutral, clinical. Ended with, deployment can proceed as written. Recommend monitoring team be briefed on attached risk scenarios and provided with emergency rollback authority. Callahan replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Saturday, I went into the office. The building was mostly empty, just weekend security and a few developers grinding on side projects. The lobby had that strange quality that familiar spaces develop when you encounter them outside normal hours, same physical geography, completely different atmosphere. I pulled up our monitoring systems and set up my own dashboard. Separate from Callahan's simplified version. I configured alerts for every critical metric I could think of. Database response times. API call success rates. Error log patterns. Memory utilization. Network latency. Disk I/O. Cache hit ratios. Thread pool saturation. 37 separate metrics feeding into a single master view that would let me see the system's health at a glance. Then I built a second dashboard. This one tracked not just metrics, but patterns. Rate of change in error frequency. Correlation between different subsystem failures. Leading indicators that would tell me a cascade was forming before it became visible in the primary numbers. I saved both dashboards with encrypted access. Set up SMS alerts to my personal phone. Configured a backup notification system that would email me if the primary alerts failed. The sun was setting when I finished. The office lights had gone to night mode, that dim ambient glow that saved energy and created enough light to navigate by. I sat in my chair, watching the metrics scroll. Everything green. Everything nominal. For now. I went home and slept for 4 hours. Sunday morning, 3 a.m. My phone started buzzing. Not alerts. Not yet. Just a message from our automated deployment system, Phase 7 deployment, initiated. I made coffee. Sat at my home workstation. Watched the metrics. For the first hour, everything looked fine. Green lights across the board. The database migration was proceeding. API calls were routing correctly. Response times were within normal parameters. I imagined Callahan asleep in his house across town, confident that his streamlined approach had been vindicated. At 4:17 a.m., the first error cluster appeared. Database locks timing out. Not critical yet, but a pattern. 17 failures in 2 minutes, all from the same geographic region. The kind of thing my checkpoints would have caught and isolated. By 4:40, the error rate had tripled. API calls were taking 6 times longer than baseline. Still within tolerance, but trending wrong. The response time curve was bending upward in that characteristic shape that precedes exponential failure. I watched the pattern develop with the detached fascination of someone observing a predicted outcome. Like watching a demolition where the explosives have been set and the countdown has started. You know what's coming. The only question is the exact moment and magnitude. At 5:03, the cascade started. One of the dependencies Yolanda had warned about failed. A caching layer that Callahan's version hadn't properly initialized. It had been working on legacy configuration, holding together through inertia and luck. When the migration pushed new data structures through it, the format mismatch caused the cache to start returning null values. Which meant every request that should have been served from cache went straight to the database. The database, which was simultaneously trying to complete a major schema migration. The system tried to compensate by spinning up additional resources, but Callahan's configuration had removed the throttling limits. No governor to prevent runaway resource allocation. The resource spawn spiraled. Each new instance created more load. More load meant slower response times. Slower response times triggered timeout conditions. Timeouts triggered retry logic. Retries created more requests. The database layer started rejecting connections. Which created more errors. Which triggered more retry attempts. Which created more connection requests. Classic cascade. Each failure feeding the next, the whole system locked in a death spiral of its own automated responses. By 5:30, 40% of our client base couldn't access their systems. My phone rang. Yolanda. It's happening, she said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension underneath. I know. I'm watching. Should we? Not yet. Sammy. Let it run. I wasn't being cruel. We had failsafes, layers beneath Callahan's streamlined surface that would prevent permanent damage. Client data was safe, backed up and replicated according to protocols that even Callahan hadn't been able to simplify away. But the outage itself, the visible failure, that needed to complete its arc. At 6:15, my phone rang again. Callahan. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 6:20. 6:23. 6:30. At 6:45, he texted, "Call me now." I called. Why did everything break at once? He wasn't yelling yet, but close. His voice had that thin, stretched quality of someone whose understanding of a situation has just inverted. The deployment was going fine and then everything failed. Every system. How is that possible? It's a cascade failure, I said. The database caching layer wasn't properly initialized in the new configuration. When it failed, the retry logic created a resource spawn loop. The loop overwhelmed the system capacity. But the monitoring showed everything was fine. The monitoring showed uptime. Uptime doesn't measure response latency or error rates. It doesn't track cache effectiveness or connection pool saturation. It tells you the server is running, not whether it's doing anything useful. Why didn't anyone catch this? The question hung in the air. I let it sit there for 3 full seconds. The original implementation plan had 17 checkpoints that would have caught this during stage deployment. The revised plan removed those checkpoints in favor of a single-wave rollout. He stopped. I could almost hear the gears turning. Your plan. You're saying your plan would have prevented this. The original plan included specific protocols for this dependency chain. Checkpoint 7 would have verified cache initialization before proceeding to database migration. Checkpoint 9 would have confirmed data format compatibility. Checkpoint 12 would have validated retry logic under load. Yes. Then why didn't you stop me? Another question that answered itself if you thought about it for more than a second. I provided technical documentation of the risks in my review memo. The decision to proceed was above my authority level. Silence. Then, quieter, the memo. The one with the failure scenarios. Yes. I thought you were being overcautious. I was being accurate. More silence. I heard him breathing, heard what might have been him sitting down heavily. Can you fix it? Yes. How long? To implement a proper rollback and restore service? 4 hours. To do it safely without risking data integrity? 8. 4 hours. Do the 4-hour version. That's not advisable. The 4-hour approach requires cutting corners similar to the ones that created this situation. We'd restore service but potentially corrupt data relationships that would cause problems later. Sammy. His voice had shifted into something harder. The voice of someone falling back on authority because competence has failed them. We have clients offline. Paying clients. Enterprise accounts. I need this fixed now. Understood. I'll need authorization to implement emergency rollback protocols. That requires board approval. I'll authorize it. You don't have that authority. Emergency rollbacks require majority board vote per the operational charter. Section 12, subsection C. I heard him breathing. Heard the moment he realized he was in a box he'd built himself. Then get the board on a call. I'll reach out to the chairman. I hung up. Sent a message to the board chairman, a man named Phillips who'd been Whitmore's lawyer for 30 years. Outlined the situation in 3 paragraphs. Attached my original implementation plan. Attached Callahan's revision. Attached my technical review memo with timestamp showing it was submitted 48 hours prior to deployment. Attached real-time metrics showing the current failure state. Phillips called me directly within 90 seconds. How bad is it? 40% of clients offline. Degraded service for another 30%. No data loss, but significant business interruption. Revenue impact estimated at $60,000 per hour. Your original plan would have prevented this. It wasn't a question. Yes. And you documented your concerns. Extensively. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. 1 hour. Conference room A. Can you present? Yes. Bring everything. Every document, every email, every memo. I want a complete timeline from initial planning to current failure state. Understood. Sammy. He paused. Whitmore told me you were the smartest person he'd ever hired. Said you saw things other people missed. I'm starting to understand what he meant. I didn't respond to that. Just said, I'll see you in an hour. I printed more documents. The original plan. The revision with tracked changes showing every modification Callahan had made. My memos. The metrics. The deployment logs. Client impact reports that were already starting to come in from our support team. Put them in 3 separate binders, color-coded, blue for original planning, red for modifications, yellow for failure documentation. At 8 a.m., I walked into conference room A. The same room where Callahan had pulled me from the rollout meeting 3 days prior. 7 board members sat around the table. Phillips at the head. Callahan near the middle, looking like he hadn't slept. His tie was loose, shirt wrinkled. The cologne was gone, replaced by the stale smell of stress sweat. I set my binders on the table. Opened my laptop. Connected to the projector. Good morning. I'm here to brief you on the Phase 7 deployment failure and recommend corrective actions. For the next 40 minutes, I walked them through it. The original architecture, shown in diagram form with each checkpoint highlighted. The risks I'd identified, displayed in a matrix that showed probability and impact. The checkpoints I'd designed, each one mapped to specific failure modes it would prevent. Callahan's revisions, shown as deletions in the track changes document. My documented objections, timestamped and archived. The deployment timeline, mapped against the error cascade that developed exactly as predicted. The failure cascade itself, animated so they could watch it develop in real time from my monitoring data. I kept my voice level. Let the documentation speak. The numbers told their own story, and it was damning enough without editorial commentary. Callahan interrupted twice. The first time to argue that hindsight was 20/20, that nobody could have predicted this specific failure mode. I pulled up my review memo, dated 4 days prior, scrolled to paragraph 7 where I'd outlined this exact failure mode. Read it aloud. Cache initialization dependency creates single point of failure. If cache layer fails after migration begins, retry logic will create request loop. Recommend checkpoint at phase transition to verify cache health before proceeding. The second time to suggest that the failure was actually an infrastructure problem, not a planning problem. That our servers couldn't handle the load. I showed the board the resource graphs demonstrating that infrastructure performed exactly as configured, the configuration was the problem. We had capacity for 3 times the actual traffic. The system was choking on its own retry attempts, not on legitimate load. When I finished, Phillips looked at Callahan. Director Callahan. Do you have a response? Callahan straightened. Pulled out his own laptop, though I noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he opened it. I think we need to keep perspective here. Yes, there were some issues with the deployment. But the core strategy was sound. We needed to move fast, to show momentum. In today's market, perfection is the enemy of progress. Sometimes you have to break things too. We broke 60% of our client operations, Phillips said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. That's not iteration. That's negligence. With respect, this is a complex situation. Sammy's approach, while thorough, would have delayed deployment by weeks. We had investor commitments, timeline pressures. The market moves fast and we need to. Did you read her technical review? This from another board member, a woman named Castellano who'd been CFO at 3 Fortune 500 companies. She was 72, wore her gray hair in a severe bun, and had a reputation for ending careers with 3-sentence performance evaluations. I reviewed all the documentation. Did you read the technical review that specifically outlined this failure scenario? Callahan's jaw worked. I assessed the risk as acceptable given the business context. You assessed it, Castellano repeated. She picked up the printed memo, held it up. What's your technical background, Director? I have 15 years of leadership experience in. Your technical background? I'm not an engineer. That's why we have technical staff. Technical staff who warned you this would happen. The room was very quiet. Someone's coffee cup clinked against the table. Outside the window, I could see the parking lot filling up as the morning shift arrived. They'd be walking into a crisis, fielding angry calls from clients who couldn't access their systems. Phillips leaned forward, fingers steepled. Miss Jonson. What's your recommendation for corrective action? Immediate rollback to pre-phase 7 configuration. Full system audit to ensure no data corruption occurred during the failure cascade. Staged redeployment following the original implementation plan with all 17 checkpoints restored. Timeline, 6 weeks for full deployment, service restored within 8 hours of rollback authorization. And your confidence level that this approach will work? 98%. The 2% uncertainty accounts for potential undiscovered data corruption that might complicate rollback. What resources do you need? Full access to production systems. Authorization to override any existing deployment locks. Yolanda Reeves and the infrastructure team assigned full-time to the recovery effort. And I'll need Callahan's deployment credentials revoked so there's no risk of conflicting changes during rollback. Callahan's head snapped up. You want to lock me out of my own deployment? I want to ensure a clean recovery environment with single-point coordination, I said. Multiple administrators making changes during crisis recovery is how you turn a contained disaster into a catastrophic one. Phillips looked around the table. Silent polling. One by one, board members nodded. Motion to implement Ms. Johnson's corrective plan with full operational authority. All in favor? 7 hands. Motion passes. Ms. Jonson, you have operational authority to execute the rollback. Director Callahan, you're on administrative leave pending a full review of the Phase 7 planning process. We'll reconvene in 48 hours to review recovery progress and determine next steps. Callahan stood. His face had gone red, then white. The color shifts were visible even from across the table. You're suspending me? For making a judgment call? We're suspending you for overriding documented technical guidance and creating a 7-figure incident, Phillips said. You're not terminated. Yet. But you're off the board and out of operations until we complete the review. Callahan looked at me. Really looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. Like I'd suddenly come into focus after years of being background noise. You set me up. I met his eyes. Kept my voice neutral. I documented the risks and recommended a safe implementation plan. You chose to proceed differently. That's not a setup. That's a choice. You could have stopped me. I gave you the information to stop yourself. What you did with that information was your decision. He grabbed his laptop. Walked to the door. Stopped with his hand on the handle. 3 days ago, you could have fought harder. You could have escalated. You could have. I could have complicated things? I said quietly. He left. The door closed with a soft pneumatic hiss. Phillips waited until the footsteps faded down the hall. Ms. Jonson. For the board's awareness, and because it's relevant to authority structures going forward, can you clarify your formal role at Twilight Technologies? I pulled out one more document. The equity transfer paperwork from Whitmore. Set it on the table. I hold 42% equity in Twilight Technologies. Transferred from founder Whitmore 3 years ago. Per the corporate charter, that makes me the largest single shareholder and grants me operational override authority in emergency situations. Castellano picked up the document. Read it. Passed it to the next board member. Why didn't you use this 3 days ago? Because I wanted Director Callahan to have the opportunity to make the right decision on his own. I wanted documentation of the decision-making process. And I wanted the board to see the full scope of the situation before invoking emergency authority. You were building a case. I was being thorough. That's one word for it. Some might call it calculated. Some might. But we're here because of poor planning and ignored warnings, not because of thorough documentation. Castellano smiled. It was thin, but genuine. Fair point. Phillips closed his folder. All right. The board recognizes Ms. Johnson's authority. Sammy, you have everything you need? I'll need Yolanda Reeves from infrastructure and the core systems team. Full access, no interference. I want operations locked down, no one makes changes without going through me or Yolanda. Done. Anything else? Access to Director Callahan's office. He has deployment keys and authorization codes I'll need to reverse his configurations. His office is yours. Security will provide access. I nodded. Stood. Gathered my binders. One more thing, Phillips said. Going forward, I think we need to reconsider our organizational structure. Have a conversation about formal titles matching actual authority. Interested in that conversation? Let me fix this first, I said. Then we can talk about what comes next. I walked out. Took the elevator down to the operations floor. Yolanda was at her desk, surrounded by 3 other engineers, all of them staring at scrolling error logs. She looked up when I approached. Relief flickered across her face. Did they? We have full authority. Start the rollback procedure. I'll coordinate with client services and handle communications. What about Callahan? On leave. Not our problem right now. She nodded slowly. Then smiled. You had this planned. I had this documented. There's a difference. Is there? Documentation is passive. It just records what happened. What people choose to do with that documentation is on them. That's a very careful distinction. I'm a very careful person. We worked for 12 straight hours. The rollback was delicate, each step requiring verification before proceeding to the next. I designed the original system with exactly this kind of recovery in mind, layers that could be peeled back without losing data or breaking dependencies. Callahan had complicated the rollback by removing staging checkpoints, but the underlying architecture was sound. By 8 p.m., we had 80% of clients back online. By midnight, 95%. The remaining 5% required individual attention, custom configurations that needed manual intervention. We'd handle those on Monday with dedicated teams. I sent updates to the board every 2 hours. Metrics, timelines, client communications. Phillips forwarded them to investors with a single line covering note, situation contained. Full briefing Tuesday. At 2 a.m., Yolanda leaned back in her chair. We're stable. Monitoring looks good. Error rates back to baseline. Good. Send your team home. We'll reconvene at 9 for the postmortem. You should go home too. I will. Soon. She studied me. When Callahan pulled you from that meeting, I thought you'd just take it. Let it go. I did. No, she said. You documented it. There's a difference. I smiled. Someone wise told me that. After she left, the operations center settled into its steady hum, green dashboards, cooling fans, infrastructure doing exactly what it was designed to do. My phone buzzed. Good work. Get some rest. I went home, watched the sunrise from bed, and didn't sleep. Some nights aren't for rest. Tuesday morning, conference room A was full again. More board members. Callahan's chair empty. I walked them through the failure, what broke, why, how we fixed it, how we'd prevent it next time. 90 minutes. No interruptions. When I finished, Phillips spoke. Director Callahan resigned last night. Effective immediately. Then the real conversation began. They needed a CTO. Authority, board access, credibility. I'd expected the offer. I declined it. Yolanda Reeves should take the role, I said. She ran the rollback flawlessly. I'll serve as technical advisor to the board. Same authority. No spotlight. Silence. Then nods. You'll report directly to us, Castellano said. Your role needs teeth. Agreed. As I stood to leave, she asked, when Callahan sidelined you, you knew this would fail. I knew the plan was unsound, I said. And I knew documentation would protect the people doing the work. Back in my office, my phone buzzed. CTO? Are you serious? You earned it, I replied. Don't mess it up. I'll try not to overcomplicate things. I smiled and pulled up the architecture. Time to rebuild it properly, redundant, methodical, resilient. Complicated. But it would work. And this time everyone would know who built it.